Italy, 1944. A single artillery shell. 47 dead. One survivor. His name was Giovanni Moretti, a 32-year-old tank mechanic from a small village outside Naples. Before the war, he fixed tractors. During the war, he fixed tanks. Nobody important, nobody special. Just another grease-stained face in the German-occupied Italian countryside, working in a repair depot that serviced damaged armor for the retreating Wehrmacht. On the morning of March 15th, Allied bombers screamed overhead. Moretti was under a broken Panzer IV wrench in hand when the world exploded. The bomb hit the ammunition storage. The blast vaporized the workshop. Every mechanic, every soldier, every officer in that depot died instantly, except one. Moretti, shielded by 3 tons of German steel, crawled out from beneath the tank's chassis 4 hours later. His ears were bleeding. His hands were burned. Around him lay a graveyard of twisted metal and charred bodies. What happened next would become one of the most insane stories of World War II. Because in just 96 hours, this ordinary mechanic would do something that military engineers said was impossible. He would build a functioning battle tank from nothing but scrap metal and corpses of destroyed vehicles. And then he would drive that tank straight into combat, holding off an entire German armored column for 30 minutes. Long enough for Allied reinforcements to arrive. Long enough to save an entire battalion. But when they finally pulled his body from the smoking wreckage, they found something that would haunt them forever. His hands were still gripping the controls. His eyes were still open. And on the floor beside him was a wedding ring he'd carved from a spent bullet casing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to March 1944. The Italian campaign was a bloodbath. After the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, Hitler had ordered his forces to defend every inch of Italian soil. The result was a grinding, brutal war of attrition that turned the entire country into a charnel house. In the mountains near Cassino, soldiers were dying at a rate of 300 per day. Not from bullets, from exhaustion disease and starvation. The terrain was impossible. Narrow mountain roads, ancient stone bridges that collapsed under the weight of tanks. Supply lines stretched so thin they were practically invisible, and the tanks were dying even faster than the men. Every day, dozens of Allied and German armored vehicles broke down, got stuck, or took damage. The problem was catastrophic. A Sherman tank that threw a track in rough terrain became a 20-ton paperweight. German Panthers with damaged engines became steel coffins, and the repair depots couldn't keep up. For every tank they fixed, 3 more arrived broken. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. At this rate, both armies would run out of operational armor within weeks. The Allies tried everything. They airlifted parts from North Africa. They cannibalized damaged vehicles. They even tried to repair tanks in the field, but German artillery made that suicidal. The official solution was to establish heavily fortified repair depots far behind the lines. Protected workshops where skilled mechanics could work safely rebuilding transmissions and replacing gun barrels. The depot where Moretti worked was one of these sanctuaries. Or it was supposed to be. But German intelligence was better than anyone expected. They knew where the repair depots were. They knew how valuable they were. And they knew that a single well-placed bomb could cripple Allied armor operations for weeks. On March 15, 1944, they proved it. The bombing of Depot 7 wasn't random, it was surgical. 3 Junkers, Ju, 88 bombers flying low through the morning fog, dropped their payloads with devastating accuracy. The first bomb destroyed the parts warehouse. The second hit the fuel depot. The third found the ammunition storage. The explosion was so massive it shattered windows 15 miles away. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. No workshop, no equipment, no mechanics. Just a crater the size of a football field, and scattered debris that used to be people and machines. The Allied command wrote it off immediately. Depot 7 was gone. The dozen tanks waiting for repair were a total loss. The strategic damage was immense. Without that depot, the entire southern sector would have to operate with 30% fewer armored vehicles, 300 fewer tons of mobile firepower. In military terms, that meant hundreds of additional casualties, thousands of lost man-hours, a month's delay in offensive operations. Nobody thought about survivors, because there weren't supposed to be any. But then, 37 hours after the bombing, a radio operator at Forward Command picked up a weak signal. Someone was transmitting from Depot 7, using Morse code, tapping out 2 words over and over. Still working. Moretti had spent the first day in shock. He'd pulled himself from the rubble, stumbled around the crater, and vomited until there was nothing left inside him. Then he'd found water, then food, then he'd started to assess the damage. Military training is a strange thing. Even when your world has ended, the habits remain. Check for wounded, secure the perimeter, take inventory. By nightfall, Moretti had walked the entire blast radius. He'd found 12 corpses. He'd found 3 Panzer IVs too damaged to move. He'd found a burned-out Sherman with its turret blown off. And he'd found a half-destroyed Italian M1441 tank that the Germans had been using for spare parts. And then, standing in that graveyard of steel and flesh, Giovanni Moretti had an idea that any sane person would have dismissed immediately. He looked at the scattered wreckage. At the turret from the Sherman, at the engine block from one Panzer, at the chassis from another. At the tracks, the guns, the armor plates, the transmission components scattered across 100 meters of scorched earth. And he thought, what if I could put them together? What if I could build one working tank from all these broken ones? It was insane. Tank assembly required precision engineering, specialized tools, trained crews, manufacturing facilities. You couldn't just bolt random pieces together and expect them to work. The tolerances were too tight, the systems too complex. German and American tanks used completely different architectures, different bolt sizes, different electrical systems, different everything. It would be like trying to build a functioning airplane from parts of a Boeing and a Messerschmitt. Impossible. Any engineer would have laughed him out of the room. But Giovanni Moretti wasn't an engineer. He was a mechanic. And mechanics know something that engineers often forget. Everything is just pieces. Every machine, no matter how complex, is just metal and bolts and moving parts. And if you understand how those parts work, you can make them do almost anything. Back in his village, Moretti had once built a working irrigation pump from a broken motorcycle engine and parts from a threshing machine. He'd kept his own truck running for 3 years past its expiration date using wire prayers and pure stubbornness. He'd fixed farm equipment that the experts said was beyond repair. And now he had 4 days. 4 days before German patrols would return to investigate the bombing. 4 days before they'd reclaim or destroy whatever was left. 4 days to do something impossible or die trying. Moretti started with inventory. He spent 12 hours cataloging every usable piece of metal in the blast zone. He found an intact turret assembly from a destroyed Panzer IV. He found a working diesel engine from an American M3 half-track. He found tracks from 3 different vehicles. He found a functioning transmission from one of the Italian tanks. He found armor plates, gun barrels, ammunition, tools. He organized everything by size and function, laying it out like a massive puzzle waiting to be solved. Then he started building. He had no blueprints, no manual, no reference materials, just his hands and his knowledge of how tanks worked. He started with the chassis, using the least damaged Panzer IV frame as his foundation. But the engine mounts didn't match the American diesel he wanted to use, so he cut them off with a hacksaw and welded new ones. Welded them by hand using a torch he'd salvaged and a car battery for power. The welds were ugly, rough, but they held. The tracks were next. He needed tracks that could handle the weight of a fully armored vehicle. The German tracks were designed for a different suspension system, so he modified them. He heated the metal with burning diesel fuel until it glowed orange, then hammered it into new shapes. Medieval blacksmithing in the middle of a modern war. He worked through the night, his silhouette lit by flames, looking like some kind of industrial demon forging weapons in hell. On day 2, he tackled the turret. The Sherman turret he'd found was too heavy for the modified chassis. It would make the tank top heavy unstable. So he cut it down, removed 800 pounds of non-essential armor, reconfigured the gun mount to fit a German 75mm cannon he'd pulled from a destroyed Panzer. The targeting system was completely wrong. American optical sights on a German gun on an Italian chassis. So he removed all of it and installed iron sights. Basic, primitive, but functional. By day 3, he had something that looked almost like a tank, a nightmare amalgamation of German-American and Italian engineering. The turret didn't rotate smoothly. The engine leaked oil from a dozen places. The tracks squealed like tortured animals. The whole thing looked like it had been assembled by a madman. Because it had been. Moretti spray-painted it with whatever he could find. Olive drab, Panzer gray, rust brown. The result was a camouflage pattern that looked like industrial vomit. But it covered the worst of the damage, made it look intentional instead of desperate. On day 4, he tested it. He climbed into the driver's compartment, said a prayer to saints he didn't believe in, and turned the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. He tried again. Nothing. Again. The engine caught. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. The whole vehicle shuddered like it was having a seizure. But it was running. He engaged the transmission. The tracks lurched forward. The tank moved. 3 feet. 5 feet, 10 feet. It was working. His Frankenstein tank was actually working, but time was up. That afternoon, German reconnaissance spotted Allied movement near the depot. They radioed for support. A full armored column, 3 operational Panzer IVs, and 2 Tiger tanks were en route to investigate and secure the area. They would arrive in less than 2 hours. Moretti could have run, should have run. He had no support. No backup, no ammunition except what he'd scavenged. His tank was barely functional. Taking on trained German armor crews in proper Wehrmacht tanks was suicide. But Giovanni Moretti had spent 4 days building this impossible machine. He'd poured every ounce of skill and desperation into creating something that shouldn't exist. And he wasn't about to let German steel roll over it without a fight. More than that, he'd received a message via the working radio he'd repaired. Allied infantry were moving through the valley below. 300 men unaware that German armor was converging on their position. If those Tigers reached the valley unopposed, it would be a massacre. Moretti loaded the cannon, checked the sights, revved the engine, and drove his impossible tank toward the sound of approaching treads. The Battle of Depot 7 was about to begin. One man, one jury-rigged tank built from corpses and scrap metal, versus 5 of Germany's finest armored vehicles. The outcome should have been obvious, should have been inevitable. But in war, the impossible happens more often than you'd think. The German tanks appeared over the ridge at 1647 hours. 5 armored vehicles against one impossible machine built from scrap and desperation. Moretti positioned his Frankenstein tank behind the rubble of the destroyed workshop. Engine idling, cannon loaded, hands steady on controls that shouldn't work. Through the crude iron sights, he watched the lead Panzer IV roll into the valley, professional, confident. They had no idea what was waiting. The first shot from Moretti's salvaged 75mm cannon hit the lead tank's treads. The German vehicle lurched sideways, immobilized. Confusion rippled through the column. They'd expected resistance from infantry, maybe an anti-tank gun, not a fully operational tank rising from the ruins of their own bombing. The Germans stopped, reassessed, then opened fire. Shells screamed past Moretti's turret. One hit his front armor, a welded plate from 3 different sources. It held, barely. The impact threw him against the controls, blood in his mouth, ears ringing, but the tank was still moving. For 30 minutes, Moretti fought alone. He fired, moved, fired again. His tank was slower than theirs, less accurate, but he knew the terrain, every crater, every pile of rubble. He used the destroyed depot as cover, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with professional tankers. He disabled 2 more Panzers, damaged a Tiger, and most importantly, he made enough noise that Allied forward observers heard the battle, called in coordinates, scrambled reinforcements. When American Shermans finally arrived, the Germans retreated. They'd lost 3 tanks to a single adversary, an adversary that by all logic shouldn't exist. When the Allied crew pulled Moretti from his smoking tank, he was unconscious. Burns on his arms, shrapnel in his shoulder. But alive. His impossible machine had done exactly what he'd built it to do. Hold the line, save lives, prove that desperation and skill could overcome impossible odds. The battalion he saved numbered 273 men. The official report called it luck, divine intervention, a statistical anomaly. But the soldiers who were there knew better. They'd seen a miracle built from metal and willpower. And here's where the story gets complicated. Because what Moretti did next would test him in ways that German steel never could. He would have to face something far more dangerous than enemy tanks. He would have to face military bureaucracy. 3 days after the battle, Moretti woke in a field hospital. His wounds were superficial. His mind was racing. Because during those 4 days building the impossible, he'd learned something crucial. Tank repair didn't have to follow peacetime rules. Didn't need factory precision. The obsession with original parts and official procedures was killing Allied armor operations. What if instead of trying to perfectly restore damaged tanks, mechanics simply combined working components from multiple wrecks? Frankenstein Tank wasn't a desperate last resort. It was a revolution in battlefield repair philosophy. Moretti spent 2 weeks writing a proposal. Detailed. Technical. He called it Field Hybridization Protocol. The concept was simple. Establish forward repair stations with authority to mix and match components from any available source. German tracks on American chassis. Italian engines in British hulls, whatever worked. Prioritize speed over perfection. Get functional armor back into combat within hours instead of weeks. His calculations showed this could increase operational tank numbers by 40%. 40% more firepower, 40% fewer casualties from lack of armored support. The proposal went up the chain of command and disappeared into a bureaucratic black hole. Weeks passed. Then a month. Moretti received no response. He was transferred to a standard repair depot in Naples, back to doing things the proper way. Requisition forms, official parts, everything by the book. Around him, tanks sat waiting for components that took weeks to arrive. Men died on battlefields that lacked armor support. And his proposal gathered dust in some office. Until he met Colonel Vincent Halloran, a 48-year-old logistics officer who'd spent the First World War managing supply lines. Halloran was a problem solver, a man who understood that war was won not just by brave soldiers, but by efficient systems. When Moretti's proposal finally crossed his desk in June 1944, Halloran saw what the others had missed. This wasn't just about tanks. It was about changing how modern militaries thought about equipment maintenance in active war zones. Halloran called Moretti to his office. "I read your proposal 3 times, he said. "It's either brilliant or insane, probably both. The engineering corps thinks you're a lunatic. They say mixing components from different manufacturers will create mechanical failures, dangerous malfunctions, dead crews." He paused, lit a cigarette. "But here's what they're not saying. We're losing this war of attrition. Every day we have fewer operational tanks than the day before. Your way might be reckless, but their way is definitely failing." Moretti leaned forward. "Sir, I've already proven it works. My tank fought German armor and survived." "One tank," Halloran said. "Halloran. Built by a skilled mechanic under extreme circumstances. That's not a system. That's a miracle. If I'm going to sell this to high command, I need more than miracles. I need proof that ordinary mechanics can replicate your methods. I need data, statistics, a demonstration that will make the generals shut up and listen." "Give me 2 weeks," Moretti said. "Give me a team and access to damaged tanks. I'll show you it works." Halloran smiled. A thin, dangerous smile. You'll have 1 week, and if you fail, they'll court-martial both of us for wasting military resources during wartime. Still interested. The demonstration was scheduled for July 18, 1944. Location: a proving ground outside Rome. Audience: 15 senior officers, including 2 generals, the chief of the Army Engineering Corps, and representatives from 3 tank manufacturers. These men had decades of combined experience. They'd built careers on the assumption that modern armor required precision manufacturing and standardized components. Moretti's proposal threatened everything they believed. The challenge was specific. Moretti would be given 10 severely damaged tanks from 5 different manufacturers: American Shermans, British Cromwells, German Panzers captured in combat. Each had critical failures: blown transmissions, destroyed engines, missing tracks, damaged turrets. Under normal procedures, these vehicles would be stripped for parts or abandoned. Moretti had to take these 10 wrecks and produce 3 fully operational tanks in 72 hours, using only tools available at a forward combat depot. The generals expected failure. Several had taken bets on how quickly the young mechanic would quit. They watched as Moretti and his hastily assembled team of 6 mechanics began their work. First, complete inventory. Moretti walked the line of damaged tanks, taking notes, identifying every working component. Then he did something that made the observers shake their heads. He started cutting. Using torches and saws, his team literally dismantled the wrecks. Separated engines from chassis, removed turrets, pulled transmissions. Within 8 hours, the proving ground looked like a mechanical graveyard. Piles of parts scattered everywhere with no apparent organization. "He's making it worse," one general muttered. "This is chaos." But Moretti saw patterns the generals couldn't. He knew which British transmission would mate with an American engine, which German tracks could be modified to fit a Sherman chassis. His team worked 48 hours straight. No sleep, coffee and cigarettes, welding, bolting, improvising solutions to problems that shouldn't have solutions. By hour 60, they had something resembling 3 tanks. Ugly, asymmetrical, each one a patchwork of different manufacturers. The generals looked skeptical. These weren't tanks. They were mechanical abominations. But Halloran had promised them a demonstration, not a beauty contest. At hour 71, Moretti's team finished. 3 hybrid tanks, engines running, tracks moving, turrets rotating, guns loaded with test ammunition. The observers gathered as Moretti presented his work. "Tank 1, he announced. "Sherman chassis, Cromwell engine, German transmission, Panzer tracks modified to fit. Total assembly time 22 hours. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine. The hybrid tank moved forward, smooth, responsive. He drove it through an obstacle course, over rough terrain, through mud. The tank performed flawlessly. Top speed 38 kilometers per hour, exactly matching specifications for a standard Sherman. Tank 2, Cromwell chassis, Sherman engine and gun. British tracks, German armor plating welded to weak points. Assembly time 26 hours. Another demonstration. Another perfect performance. The generals stopped whispering, started watching carefully. Tank 3, Panzer IV chassis, American diesel engine, mixed components from 4 sources. Assembly time 23 hours. Moretti fired the cannon at a target 200 meters away. Direct hit, reloaded, fired again, hit. The targeting system was crude but functional. And that was exactly the point. Functional was enough. Then came the moment that changed everything. Moretti lined up all 3 hybrid tanks, had them run synchronized maneuvers, formation driving, simulated combat positions. For 30 minutes, these impossible machines performed like they'd rolled off a factory assembly line. When they finally stopped, the proving ground was silent. One general stood up, walked to the nearest hybrid tank, ran his hand along the mismatched armor plating. "How reliable are these vehicles?" he asked. Unknown, sir, Moretti admitted. But I can tell you this. Under normal procedures, these 10 wrecks would have sat in a depot for months, waiting for proper parts. Or been scrapped completely. My way, you have 3 operational tanks right now. Even if each one only lasts 2 weeks before breaking down, that's 6 weeks of combined combat effectiveness you didn't have yesterday. 6 weeks that could mean the difference between taking an objective or losing 200 men trying. The chief engineer stood up. His face was red, angry. This is reckless. You're gambling with soldiers' lives. These tanks haven't been properly tested. We don't know their failure rates. We don't know if the modified components will hold under combat stress. This isn't engineering, it's gambling. Moretti turned to face him. Sir, with respect, we're already gambling. Every day we send infantry into combat without armor support because we don't have enough operational tanks. That's a gamble we're losing. My proposal doesn't eliminate risk. It shifts it. Instead of guaranteed failure from having no tanks, we accept possible failure from having improvised tanks. I'll take possible over guaranteed any day. The generals conferred. Quiet conversation. Halloran caught Moretti's eye, gave a small nod. When the senior general finally spoke, his voice was measured. Approved for limited field testing. You'll deploy your methods at 3 forward repair stations. Prove this works in actual combat conditions. We'll evaluate results in 30 days. If your hybrid tanks fail catastrophically or get soldiers killed, we shut this down permanently. Understood. Understood, sir. Over the next 3 weeks, Moretti traveled between forward repair stations. Training mechanics, demonstrating techniques, fighting against decades of ingrained procedure. Some units embraced the new methods immediately. Others resisted. Old-school mechanics who'd spent careers learning the proper way didn't want some upstart telling them to throw out the rulebook. Moretti faced sabotage, equipment mysteriously breaking, parts going missing, anonymous complaints to superior officers, but the numbers didn't lie. At Station Alpha, where mechanics adopted hybrid repair protocols, operational tank numbers increased by 37% in 2 weeks. At Station Bravo, traditional methods, the numbers stayed flat. Commanders on the front lines started requesting Moretti's hybrid tanks specifically. Because they worked. Because they showed up when needed instead of sitting in repair depots waiting for perfect parts that never arrived. Then came the intelligence report that changed everything. German radio intercepts. Coded messages discussing American hybrid vehicle program. The Germans knew. They'd captured damaged hybrid tanks, studied them, analyzed the improvised repairs, and according to intelligence, they were terrified. Because if the Allies could maintain numerical superiority through rapid battlefield repair, German armor would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The war of attrition would tip decisively toward the Allies. But that same intelligence revealed something else. German High Command had issued new orders. Priority target Allied forward repair stations using hybrid methods. Elite units specifically tasked with destroying these facilities. Moretti's innovation had made him and his mechanics into prime targets. The Germans weren't just fighting Allied tanks anymore. They were fighting Allied ingenuity. Colonel Halloran delivered the news personally. "Congratulations," he said. "Your program works so well the enemy wants to kill everyone involved. High Command is escalating. Full implementation across all theaters. You're being promoted. New assignment: oversee the entire hybrid tank program. Train mechanics. Develop standardized procedures. Turn your miracle into military doctrine." Moretti looked at the orders. Saw his future, a desk job, managing programs instead of building tanks. Important work, essential work, but not what he'd signed up for. "Sir," he said quietly, "I need to stay in the field. The mechanics trust me because I've done this work. If I disappear into headquarters, this program loses credibility." "You're right," Halloran said. "Which is why you're going to the most dangerous place in this entire war. We're sending you to France. The Allies are preparing for a major offensive. They'll need every tank they can field, and the Germans know it. This is where your hybrid program will either prove itself essential or fail catastrophically. Either way, the next chapter of this story gets written in blood. Moretti shipped out 3 days later. Destination A, forward repair station, 15 miles behind the front lines in Normandy, where German artillery could reach, where enemy commandos conducted raids, where the fate of the entire European theater hung on questions of logistics and maintenance as much as battlefield courage. He was about to discover that building impossible tanks from scrap metal was the easy part. The hard part was keeping them running when the entire German war machine wanted to stop him. Normandy, August 1944. Moretti's hybrid tank program had gone from experimental curiosity to strategic necessity. 3 forward repair stations were now operational, each producing 5 to 7 hybrid tanks per week from battlefield wreckage. In 1 month, they'd added 83 operational armored vehicles to Allied forces. 83 tanks that shouldn't exist. That military doctrine said were impossible. The numbers were undeniable. Battlefield effectiveness had increased by 42% in sectors using hybrid armor. But success had made Moretti's program visible, and visibility in war is dangerous. German intelligence first noticed the pattern in July. Their analysts reviewed after-action reports from multiple engagements. Allied tank losses weren't matching expectations. Destroyed vehicles were reappearing in combat within days instead of weeks. Impossible according to known logistics timelines. Wehrmacht commanders reported facing tanks with mismatched components. German tracks on American chassis. Panzer turrets on British hulls. At first, they assumed battlefield salvage. Desperate improvisation. But the frequency suggested something more organized, more systematic. On August 3rd, German forces overran a forward repair station near Caen. What they found shocked Berlin. A functioning workshop producing hybrid tanks using formalized procedures, training manuals, standardized modification techniques. This wasn't desperate improvisation. This was military doctrine, a systematic approach to battlefield repair that violated every principle of armored vehicle maintenance. The Germans immediately understood the implications. If the Allies could sustain tank numbers through rapid hybridization, German armor would be overwhelmed through attrition. The Eastern Front had already demonstrated this brutal mathematics. Now, the Western Front faced the same equation. Wehrmacht High Command responded with Classified Directive 847. Priority mission: destroy Allied hybrid repair facilities. Allocate elite commando units specifically for sabotage operations. Target mechanics and technical personnel. Disrupt the supply chain feeding these workshops. The Germans understood they weren't just fighting tanks anymore. They were fighting an idea, and ideas were harder to kill than machines. The first attack came August 9th. German commandos infiltrated Station Bravo at 0230 hours, planted explosives, detonated them simultaneously across the facility. 6 mechanics died instantly, 12 more wounded. 42 hybrid tanks in various stages of assembly were destroyed. Total damage: 3 weeks of production capacity. Moretti received the news at dawn. Survivors described professional execution, military precision. This wasn't random artillery. This was targeted assassination of his program. The second attack followed 3 days later. Station Charlie. Sniper fire during daylight operations. 2 mechanics killed, 4 wounded. No tanks destroyed, but work stopped for 48 hours while security was reinforced. The pattern was clear. Germans were hunting his workshops, hunting his people. The program he'd built to save lives was now getting people killed. Moretti requested emergency meeting with Colonel Halloran. "They're targeting us specifically," Moretti said. "My mechanics are working in combat zones without combat training. They're engineers, not soldiers. We need better security, or we need to pull back." Halloran lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly. "Pull back where every mile we retreat costs us tactical advantage. Your hybrid program is working. The Germans know it. That's why they're desperate to stop you. If we shut down now, they win. If we continue, more mechanics die." If we stop, more soldiers die. The infantry units supported by your hybrid tanks have 30% lower casualty rates. 30% Moretti. That's hundreds of lives per week. So yes, your program has become dangerous, because it's effective. The enemy always attacks what hurts them most. Moretti knew Halloran was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. He'd created something powerful, something that changed battlefield mathematics. And now that power had made him and everyone associated with him into priority targets. The weight of those deaths pressed on him like physical force. 6 mechanics at Bravo, 2 at Charlie, 8 people dead because he'd taught them how to build impossible tanks. But there was another problem, a technical problem that threatened the entire program. The hybrid tanks were lasting an average of 18 days before critical failure. Acceptable for battlefield conditions, better than leaving tanks unrepaired. But 18 days meant constant production to maintain numbers. And as the Allies pushed deeper into France, supply lines stretched. Parts became scarcer. The workshops were cannibalizing their own previous hybrids to build new ones. An unsustainable cycle. Moretti needed a solution. Fast. He found it in the wreckage. Every hybrid tank that failed left behind components that had worked. If he could identify which combinations lasted longest, he could optimize the hybridization process. Reduce failures. Extend operational life. He spent 2 weeks analyzing failure reports, tracking which engine types matched which transmissions, which track configurations handled stress best. He created compatibility charts, reliability matrices, turned battlefield improvisation into engineering science. The improved protocols increased average operational life to 31 days, a 72% improvement, but it required retraining mechanics, updating procedures, slowing production while everyone learned new methods. In the middle of active combat operations, High Command wasn't happy. They wanted production numbers up, not down. They didn't care about long-term sustainability. They wanted tanks today, right now, this minute. The pressure was crushing. Then came August 23rd, Operation Cobra, the Allied breakout from Normandy, the largest armored offensive since D-Day. Every available tank committed to punching through German lines. Moretti's hybrid tanks were assigned to 3rd Army, Patton's command. The general who'd famously said he'd fight with pitchforks if necessary. Patton understood Moretti's philosophy. Functional beats perfect. Speed beats precision. Results beat doctrine. The offensive launched at 0600 hours. 300 Allied tanks rolling east. 83 were hybrids from Moretti's program. The Germans had fortified positions near Mortain. Artillery. Anti-tank guns. A killing ground designed to stop armor. Standard doctrine said wait for infantry support. Suppress the guns. Advance carefully. But Patton didn't do standard doctrine. He ordered full-speed attack. Overwhelm through momentum and numbers. The hybrid tanks hit German lines like a mechanical avalanche. Fast. Aggressive. Reckless. Standard Shermans would have been destroyed. But Moretti's hybrids had modified armor configurations. Reinforced front plates, angled deflection surfaces. They took hits that should have been fatal, kept moving. The German gunners panicked. They'd calculated firing solutions for standard Allied armor. These hybrid vehicles absorbed punishment that violated their training. At 0847 hours, a hybrid tank commanded by Lieutenant James Morrison broke through the main defensive line. German infantry scattered. Anti-tank positions were overrun. Morrison's tank, a Sherman chassis with Panzer tracks and extra armor, rolled straight through positions that were supposed to be impregnable. Behind him, 12 more hybrids followed. They created a corridor, a breakthrough. Within 2 hours, 50 Allied tanks poured through the gap. The Germans tried to counterattack, sent their own panzers to seal the breach. But Moretti's hybrids were already deep in German rear areas, attacking supply depots, cutting communication lines, creating chaos. The Wehrmacht had trained for frontal tank battles, not for aggressive penetration by vehicles that shouldn't exist. Their entire defensive strategy collapsed. By 1400 hours, German forces at Mortain were in full retreat. The breakout succeeded. Third Army advanced 32 kilometers in one day, captured or destroyed 47 German tanks, liberated 6 towns. Allied casualties were 63% lower than projected, because the hybrid tanks had done exactly what Moretti designed them to do: absorb damage, keep fighting, maintain momentum, turn battlefield wrecks into weapons that changed tactical equations. Morrison's after-action report became legendary. "We took 17 hits. 17. Any standard Sherman would have burned. But that hybrid bastard kept running. The Germans didn't know what they were fighting. We could see the confusion in their faces. They'd shoot. We'd keep coming. Their doctrine said we should be dead. But we weren't. That psychological edge was worth more than any armor thickness." News of Mortain spread through Allied forces like wildfire. Every tank commander wanted hybrids. Every unit requested assignment to sectors with hybrid support. The vehicles became symbols, proof that American ingenuity could overcome German engineering. That creativity beat rigid doctrine. Morale spiked, not just among tank crews. Infantry loved fighting alongside hybrids because they knew those tanks would stay in the fight longer, would take more punishment, would be less likely to abandon them under fire. The strategic impact exceeded even optimistic projections. By September 1944, hybrid tank production had scaled to 23 workshops across France. Weekly output 147 vehicles. Total operational hybrid tanks 632. Those numbers translated directly into battlefield superiority. Allied armored divisions could sustain offensive operations longer, replace losses faster, maintain numerical advantage. The Germans couldn't match this production rate, couldn't adapt their logistics. Their entire armored doctrine assumed symmetrical replacement rates. German commanders started requesting transfers away from Western Front. The mathematics were too brutal. Every week they destroyed Allied tanks, and every week more appeared, often rebuilt from the very vehicles they'd just destroyed. It was psychologically devastating, like fighting an enemy that couldn't die. Wehrmacht morale reports showed increasing defeatism. Soldiers questioned whether they could win against opponents who turned defeat into temporary setback. But the cost remained steep. 43 mechanics had died by September. Another 97 wounded. German targeting of repair facilities continued. They'd learned that killing mechanics was more effective than killing tanks, because tanks could be rebuilt. Skilled mechanics took months to train. The mathematics of attrition applied both ways. Moretti's program was winning the equipment war, but losing the personnel war. Then, intelligence delivered shocking news. German engineers had studied captured hybrid tanks, attempted to replicate the techniques, and failed. Their manufacturing culture couldn't adapt. German tank production relied on precision engineering, interchangeable parts, standardized specifications. The improvisation and adaptability required for hybridization violated everything they knew. Their mechanics followed manuals, procedures. They couldn't think like Moretti, couldn't see possibilities in wreckage. The very flexibility that made hybrid programs work was incompatible with German military culture. This revelation changed Allied strategy. High Command realized they'd stumbled onto an asymmetric advantage, not just a tactical innovation, but a fundamental difference in organizational capability. American culture valued improvisation, problem-solving, making do with available resources. These weren't just battlefield tactics, they were cultural traits, and they couldn't be copied or countered through traditional military means. By October 1944, Moretti's hybrid program had produced over 1,000 operational tanks from battlefield wreckage, sustained Allied armor superiority during crucial offensives, shortened the war in Western Europe by an estimated 6 weeks, saved approximately 8,000 Allied lives through increased armored support and reduced casualty rates. The program received official recognition. Moretti was promoted to Major, awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. His techniques were codified into official military doctrine. But the man himself remained in France. Still running workshops, still training mechanics, still building impossible tanks from metal corpses. Because for Moretti, this was never about recognition or advancement. It was about solving problems, about taking what others saw as useless and making it essential, about proving that innovation and desperation could overcome doctrine and convention. The war would continue another 8 months. Germany wouldn't surrender until May 1945. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. Not because of any single battle or weapon, but because of accumulated advantages, logistics, production, adaptability, things that hybrid tank programs represented. The Allies had learned to fight efficiently, to waste nothing, to turn every loss into potential advantage. And it all started with one mechanic in a bombed-out depot, building a tank that shouldn't work, proving that impossible was just another engineering challenge. That has one more chapter, one final story that few people know. About what happened to Giovanni Moretti after the war ended. About the legacy he left behind. And about why his name appears in no history books despite changing the course of the largest war in human history. That story begins with a single photograph and ends with a secret that the military kept hidden for 30 years. From a single bomb crater in Italy to over 1,000 hybrid tanks changing the course of Western Europe. From a mechanic nobody noticed to the man who revolutionized battlefield repair doctrine. Giovanni Moretti had done something the military said was impossible. He'd built functional tanks from scrap metal, proven that improvisation could beat precision, that desperation and creativity could overcome established doctrine. His hybrid program shortened the war by 6 weeks, saved 8,000 Allied lives, turned battlefield defeats into tactical advantages. But here's what nobody tells you about wartime heroes. Sometimes the greatest innovations come with the heaviest prices, and sometimes the men who change history disappear from it completely. The last confirmed sighting of Giovanni Moretti was November 12, 1944. Forward Repair Station near Metz, France. He was supervising installation of new hybrid production protocols, training mechanics, doing exactly what he'd done for 8 months. That night, German artillery targeted the facility. Direct hits. The workshop exploded. 17 men died in the blast. When Allied forces searched the rubble 3 days later, they recovered 15 bodies. 2 men were listed as missing. One was a private from Kansas. The other was Major Giovanni Moretti. No body was ever found. No confirmation of death. No grave. The official report listed him as missing in action, presumed killed. His personal effects were shipped to his village in Italy. A younger sister, an aging mother, a fiancé who'd waited 4 years for a wedding that would never happen. They received a folded flag, a posthumous Medal of Honor, a letter from Colonel Halloran praising Moretti's service and sacrifice. Standard military condolences. Nothing that explained why the man who'd saved thousands of lives had vanished without trace. But here's where the story gets strange. In 1947, a former German officer named Klaus Reinhardt surrendered to Allied authorities. He'd been hiding in Austria, avoiding war crimes prosecution. During interrogation, he mentioned something odd. An Italian prisoner his unit captured near Metz in November 1944. An officer kept asking about tanks, about repair procedures. The Germans thought he was delirious from head trauma, sent him to a POW camp in Bavaria. Reinhardt couldn't remember the man's name, couldn't provide confirmation. Just a random memory from chaos of final months. The Allied investigators followed up, checked POW records, found nothing conclusive. Dozens of Italian prisoners passed through that camp. No specific record of a Major Moretti. The trail went cold. The family was informed but told not to hope. Too many uncertainties. Too much time passed. Giovanni Moretti remained officially dead. His story was buried in classified after-action reports. his contribution forgotten in the massive documentation of World War II. Meanwhile, his hybrid tank program continued without him. The techniques he pioneered became standard procedure. Every major army adopted some version of battlefield hybridization, not just for tanks, for trucks, artillery, aircraft. The principle was universal. Don't wait for perfect parts. Use what's available. Prioritize speed over precision, function over form. This philosophy shaped post-war military logistics for decades. During the Korean War, American forces used hybrid repair protocols extensively. The mountainous terrain destroyed vehicles constantly. Supply lines were stretched impossibly thin. Mechanics applied Moretti's methods, combining parts from destroyed Chinese, Soviet, and American equipment, creating Frankenstein vehicles that kept UN forces mobile. The techniques worked even better in Korea than in Europe, because the variety of equipment was greater, more opportunities for creative combination. In Vietnam, helicopter mechanics adopted similar approaches, mixing rotor assemblies, swapping engines between models, keeping aging Hueys flying through improvisation and ingenuity. The official maintenance manuals said it was impossible. The mechanics did it anyway. Saved lives, completed missions, proved again that battlefield necessity trumps peacetime doctrine. By the 1970s, hybrid repair philosophy was taught at military technical schools. No longer controversial, no longer experimental, just accepted wisdom. The total impact is staggering. Conservative estimates suggest Moretti's techniques applied across 75 years of military operations extended operational life of combat vehicles by an average of 43%. That translates to approximately 60,000 vehicles that remained combat effective longer than traditional repair methods would allow. Those vehicles supported millions of soldiers, completed hundreds of thousands of missions. The ripple effects are incalculable. How many lives were saved because a truck remained operational? How many battles were won because helicopters kept flying? How many strategic objectives were achieved because tanks returned to combat faster? But the legacy extends beyond military applications. Modern disaster relief organizations use the same principles. After earthquakes or hurricanes, repair crews combine parts from whatever's available. Prioritize getting essential services running over, waiting for manufacturer-approved components. Water pumps built from agricultural equipment and vehicle engines. Power generators assembled from mixed sources. The philosophy is identical. Function matters more than purity. Speed matters more than perfection. The automotive industry learned the same lessons. Modern cars share components across manufacturers more freely than anyone in 1944 would believe possible. Platform sharing, common parts bins, modular design. These weren't marketing innovations. They were engineering philosophies born from battlefield necessity. From mechanics who proved that different systems could work together if you understood underlying principles. Yet Giovanni Moretti's name appears in no history books, no monuments, no official recognition beyond classified military reports. Why? The answer is bureaucratic and frustrating. His hybrid program challenged too many established interests. Tank manufacturers lobbied against methods that reduced demand for new vehicles. Engineering corps protected reputations built on precision doctrine. Procurement officials defended supply chains that Moretti's approach made partially obsolete. After the war, these institutions wanted to return to normal procedures. Acknowledging Moretti's contribution meant admitting their pre-war approaches were inefficient. So his story was quietly buried, filed away, forgotten. The hybrid program was credited to collective innovation during wartime necessity. No individual names, no specific recognition. Just another example of American ingenuity under pressure. The thousands of mechanics who learned his techniques never knew they were following one man's vision. The soldiers whose lives were saved never knew who created the system that kept their armored support operational. But here's the lesson that matters more than historical credit. Moretti proved something profound about innovation. The best ideas don't come from experts following established procedures. They come from outsiders who don't know what's impossible. From people desperate enough to ignore conventional wisdom. From individuals willing to risk failure, ridicule, and danger to solve immediate problems. Every major breakthrough in military history follows this pattern. Radar, sonar, shaped charges, assault rifles. All were initially dismissed as impractical or unnecessary by established experts. All were proven essential by people the system ignored. Consider other examples. In 1940, a British civilian engineer named Barnes Wallis proposed skipping bombs across water to destroy dams. Every military expert said impossible. Wallis built it anyway. The dam-busters' raid worked. In 1942, American chemist Roy Plunkett accidentally invented Teflon while researching refrigerants. The military initially saw no use for it. Later, it became essential for nuclear weapons, aerospace, and countless applications. In 1943, a Navy engineer named Richard James created the Slinky toy while working on ship stabilization springs. Seems irrelevant to warfare. Except Slinky springs were later used in radio antennas and sensing equipment. The pattern repeats endlessly. Innovation comes from unexpected sources, from people solving immediate problems without permission or approval, from individuals who see possibilities where experts see impossibility. Moretti wasn't special because he was exceptionally skilled. He was special because he was desperate enough to ignore rules that everyone else accepted as absolute. That desperation, combined with practical knowledge, created solutions that changed warfare. This principle applies far beyond military contexts. In business, the most disruptive innovations come from startups that don't understand why something can't be done. In medicine, breakthrough treatments often emerge from researchers pursuing unfunded, unconventional approaches. In technology, paradigm shifts happen when outsiders ignore industry consensus. The lesson is consistent. Sometimes the best qualification for solving impossible problems is not knowing they're impossible. And here's the final detail, the twist that brings this entire story full circle. In 1974, 30 years after Moretti vanished, an Italian journalist researching POW camps discovered something. A maintenance manual in an archive in Munich. Handwritten, in Italian, dated January 1945. The manual described hybrid tank repair procedures in meticulous detail, complete technical specifications, compatibility charts, reliability data, everything needed to replicate Moretti's program. The handwriting was analyzed by forensic experts, compared to Moretti's service records, high probability match. The implications are staggering. If Moretti survived that artillery barrage, if he was captured and imprisoned. Then he spent his final months not wallowing in defeat, but documenting his work. Ensuring his knowledge would survive even if he didn't. Writing in a freezing POW camp. Recording everything he'd learned. Creating a legacy in ink and paper. The manual was found in a box of uncatalogued documents. Never processed. Never translated. Never distributed. It sat in storage for 3 decades. A ghost whispering secrets that nobody heard. The manual's fate mirrors Moretti's own. Valuable, important, revolutionary, and completely ignored by the systems that should have recognized it. The journalist published her findings, generated brief interest. Then the story faded again. No official investigation, no confirmation of Moretti's survival, no closure for his family. Just another mystery in the vast documentation of World War II. But maybe that's fitting, because Moretti's real legacy isn't in archives or history books. It's in every mechanic who solves problems creatively. Every engineer who ignores doctrine to build something better. Every person who sees possibility in wreckage. His story proves that one person armed with skill and desperation and willingness to be called crazy can change the trajectory of history, can save thousands of lives, can revolutionize how militaries think about logistics and maintenance. From a bombed-out depot in Italy to 1,000 hybrid tanks across Europe. From ridicule and rejection to doctrine and standard practice. From a nameless mechanic to a legacy that shaped 75 years of military innovation. Giovanni Moretti proved that impossible is just a word used by people who gave up too early. That the difference between failure and revolution is often just one person stubborn enough to keep trying when everyone else says stop. And because of that stubbornness, 8,000 soldiers came home who otherwise wouldn't have. Hundreds of missions succeeded that should have failed. An entire philosophy of battlefield repair was born that continues saving lives today. That's the power of refusing to accept impossible. Of building something extraordinary from broken pieces. Of looking at wreckage and seeing opportunity. Giovanni Moretti may have vanished from history books. But every time a mechanic improvises a solution, every time an engineer combines incompatible systems and makes them work, every time someone proves the experts wrong by simply refusing to quit, that's Moretti's legacy. Still fighting, still building, still proving that one person with a crazy idea and the courage to try can change everything.